Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Stranger Things finale.
Oh, hi, Mark.
What's up, Freccero fam? Welcome back to my channel. I'd like to experience everything that life has to offer. I know a bit of a weird setting in my van. It's nighttime, but like ominous with the light. I'm about to do parkour, and I got here about 20 or 30 minutes too early. The one time there's like no LA traffic. So I figured to film this video because I just watched the Stranger Things finale. A lot on my mind, and I gotta say, overall, jumping right into it, I liked it. Also, if you've not seen it yet, do not watch the rest of this video. There are spoilers. Just want to say that. Overall, I really did like it. I saw on social media, a lot of people felt mixed about it. Some people even compared it to like Game of Thrones. I would not go that far at all. I thought it was a great finale. When there's a show this epic, and there's a lot of moving parts, I gotta be honest, where I thought the finale was a good way to wrap it up. I genuinely did. I don't think it was perfect. There are a few things that I didn't like, and we'll talk about that, but overall, I thought it was pretty good. What's interesting, though, and I will say this, I don't know if I was the biggest fan of this season. I feel like the fourth season was probably the best, in my opinion. This one, I saw some comment on TikTok, and I feel like it kind of nailed it, that there's a lot happening, but also nothing happening all at once. And I do kind of feel that way, where I feel like they just kind of added all these other elements that in some ways added more to the Stranger Things universe or multiverse or whatever, because of course everything with the wormhole and Dimension X or the Abyss and whatnot. So I actually did kind of like that. I gotta be honest, that there was another element to it, but I feel like in other ways they just added so much into this season that in some ways I thought was necessary, and in other ways I felt like just was kind of some fluff pieces, I hate to say it. When it comes to the finale specifically, I thought it was a good way overall to wrap things up. I thought that it was, I don't think it was perfect, and I feel like, I gotta say this as a side note, I do think this is a show that's as good as Stranger Things. I mean, I gotta be honest, one of the best shows I feel like I've ever seen. I feel like it is hard to make a good finale. Like, it is really difficult. I feel like there's only a few shows that genuinely crushed it with the finale. I feel like Breaking Bad, in my opinion, have the best finale of any show I've ever seen. Then maybe Dark, I will say. Besides that, I don't know. I mean, I feel like a lot of other shows usually just flop. And I feel like this was an excellent finale. I do kind of wish, though, gotta be honest, that they did separate this into multiple episodes. I feel like there was a lot going on in this last one, and I feel like they did that purposely. So this could be like a personal taste perspective. Obviously, this is just my opinion. But I feel like that it would be kind of cool to have almost like some parts of this be its own episode and then have a different finale. I don't know. I mean, it would be kind of tough to do that, but I feel like there was a lot to this. So like, say, when they killed Vecna, which we'll talk about because I feel mixed about that. When they killed Vecna, I remember being like, wait a minute, it's not even halfway over. There's still so much more to happen, right? And talking about that, I do like I said, the whole Dimension X thing, the Mind Flayer, like all those other elements kind of come into play. How there's almost, if I'd say like this, like a twist at the end, how you realize that, wait a minute, like Henry or Vecna himself was being controlled, and that added a whole other element to everything that happened with him touching that stone and everything. So I like that. Also, I gotta say, and I should have looked up his name before filming this, his acting performance, the actor who plays Henry, I know it's like JCB is his initials. I said James. I should have looked up his name before filming this. His acting performance, I thought, was the best by far of the episode. I thought that was, especially when he's talking about how we are one with him, the Mind Flayer, like that was unbelievable acting in my opinion. And I really actually did like that. There was a point where I wasn't sure if he was going to turn on the Mind Flayer and he was going to join them. I think that was, I saw somewhere, some rumor that they did discuss that in the writer's room to potentially have that be an option. And in some ways, I feel like that would have been, I think, maybe a more interesting ending for the whole Vecna Henry story. I don't know. But I will say this. I thought that he was a phenomenal enemy. Like, he was a perfect character in the way he did everything. Like, one of the best villains, honestly, I feel like, of any show I've ever seen. Especially the different, parts of him, like in terms of being Vecna, but also Henry, also Mr. What. Like, I loved all those kind of elements to him. I feel like, though, and I feel like a lot of people feel this way too, that the last battle with, Elle and Vecna and also Will getting involved as well, and everybody else. Like, I feel like it was a bit lackluster. I feel like that it could have been a little bit more epic. Like, it was satisfying, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like it ended that saga in a good way, but not... It didn't feel fully complete to me. I don't know. I feel like the fight could have been more epic. I just have to say that. Like, it wasn't as bad, I feel like... And if you've not seen Game of Thrones, skip over the next 20 seconds. With the Game of Thrones, when, they kill the White Walker, or the White Walker King or whatever, I remember being like, that's it? And it felt very anticlimactic to me. Like, I didn't feel satisfied with, Arya Stark killing him, and now I was like, oh, alright, that's it. Okay. Like, that's how I felt with Game of Thrones. With Stranger Things, I didn't feel that way. So I will say that. I feel like that the death of Vecna and Henry felt like, I don't use the word satisfying, but complete, but I feel like that fight could have been a lot more epic. I do want to say that because I feel like that was a huge part of the show. I mean, you realize there's so much backstory behind, the extra dimensions and the Mind Flayer and then the upside. Like, there's so much to it that I feel like it really was building up to that moment of them versus Henry versus Vecna. And then there's a brief moment where you could tell that Henry's so human, so he maybe wants to maybe fight back and maybe join them potentially. But then he was like, no, like, it's not just me. I know the truth. Like, so yeah, I feel like that was brilliant scripting. I will say I really, really did like that. And then going from then on, I feel like talk about them ending the characters' arcs, like how they had, the adults of it were like that of the group, having a couple beers, talking about meeting up every month and stuff like that. Like, I wasn't sure about that. And at first I was like, oh my God, they're yapping. Because I got to be honest, I feel like there's a lot of parts in this season that felt too yappy to me. And I get they were trying to wrap things up. And the way I look at it is like, I can't remember when the first season came out. Was it 2017 or 2018? But it's been almost a decade, maybe a few years off, maybe 7 or 8 years since the show came about. So a lot of people have been invested in the show for almost a decade. And I feel like that's probably why they had so much, again, if I'm going to say it like this, like yap sessions between the characters where they were just like talking. Like, there was one meme I saw that they're like, when Max and what's her name, Holly or whatever, is about to leave, and they're like having podcasts between them talking about all this, and I'm like, yeah, like there were some scenes where I'm like, oh my God, they're dragging on this like talking and whatnot. But on the other end, I kind of get that they kind of want to start wrapping up these character stories. A lot of people have been invested in these characters, and especially too, I think seeing them start off as little kids, like when they did all the flashbacks, it was pretty crazy to see, like, dang, like they were so young, now way older, of course, and it is kind of crazy, in a weird way, if I'd say it like this. Everybody who's watched Stranger Things from the beginning, myself included, you kind of grew up with them in a sense. So I can see why, to an extent, they do want to put a lot of effort into really wrapping up the character stories. Whether it was Steve, like, say, being a baseball coach, staying in Hawkins, for example, or like all the other characters, and really talking about what they're doing next, what they're going to evolve into, where they're going, schools, jobs, lifestyle pursuits, dating, all this kind of stuff. I feel like it did make a lot of sense that they did wrap that up. And I think I liked all that, honestly. And then the whole thing with Elle, let's talk about that as like kind of like an interesting last point. Because overall, I did think the finale was great. They did a lot with the finale. And I think one interesting thing that I was kind of curious is how they're going to actually end it. And ending on a cliffhanger, it does bring up... there's so many perspectives, there's so many debates. There's so many debates, so many different angles. And I'm just going to say this. If I had to guess, I actually do think Elle is still alive. Half me feels like, is that because I just don't want her to have died? Is that because maybe it's a more peaceful ending? I actually do think she's still alive, because when I look at Mike's, story that he told at the end of Dungeons and Dragons when they were playing it, I feel like it makes, if I look at which one's more probable, did she actually die, which actually is very possible, right? Very, very possible. I mean, no one knows. Or she's still alive. I feel like her still being alive actually makes a good amount of sense. Like, there was a couple of perspectives I read online. Like, someone said, like, when she was, I forgot the other, I just forgot her name. The other psychic girl that they were with. Oh my God. I literally just forgot her name. But the other girl who seemed like she died, when Elle was pressing her hands against her and she had blood everywhere, the next scene the blood's gone. Now granted, you could argue, did she just take it off? But in a lot of scenes, the blood's usually still on them, right? So was that something that when the blast went off with the helicopter and the guy shot the gun, that she did one of her psychic power things to make it seem like she's dying? That way later on, she could help protect Elle and whatnot. But then you have to argue, how did she survive the blast to make it seem like that for that long and then allow Elle to disappear? But then maybe she also died too. I think no matter what, she still died. The other psychic girl, again, I completely just forgot her name. I think she still definitely died. And maybe her last thing she did right before she died was create that image of Elle in front of, the entrance to the Upside Down. And then, that was kind of the last thing that she did. Tough to say. I feel like that, although some people have different perspectives, I actually kind of like that it ended on a cliffhanger, as in, like, choose your own adventure, where it's like, we really don't know. No one knows if Elle actually survived or not, but I feel like she did, especially, when the last thing she did was do the kind of the remote viewing or jump into that world and talk to Mike, that I feel like she couldn't have done that because they have the kryptonite things going off. So she still was able to do that. You could argue maybe because she's in the Upside Down, maybe the kryptonite didn't affect her, so maybe that's why she was able to do that. I don't know. But she did say, hey, well, someday you will understand. Or excuse me, Mike, someday you will understand. But I don't know. I feel like when I look at like a lot of the interesting lore written online about what people said about her living and her dying, I feel like the arguments for her living, I think, have more concrete evidence. I feel like, again, just my perspectives, but overall, again, which is kind of cool to say this, like, there was so much of this finale, like I said, 2 hours of a lot of stuff happening, from the Henry and Vecna saga ending, the Mind Flayer, saga ending, the Upside Down ending, them wrapping up all the character stories individually. I also really did like how they did that, like I mentioned earlier, as a lot of people have been invested in this whole, series for almost a decade, that it was kind of cool. And I feel like, I don't know if I've ever seen this in any other show the way they did it, because there was a lot of characters in the show, that it seemed like each character got their own individualized ending that really wrapped up their story. I thought that was really well scripted and really well done. And then, of course, finishing off with this whole cliffhanger with Elle, I thought was a nice touch. Some people didn't like it. They're like, no. I need a concrete ending. I can't go the rest of my life not knowing what happened. Almost like Inception. If you remember the movie Inception, where you're like, wait a minute, is he in a dream or not? I kind of like there was a bit like of a choose your own adventure. How do you want the story to end from your angle? And I will say, for me, after looking at all the evidence, reading a lot of stuff online, looking back on the footage too and stuff like that, I do feel like she's alive.